Hi people, this is Daniel from Devil & Sons Guitars here, and today in the first of my A to Z series of guitar videos I am looking at action. Okay, so action, also known as the string height, can be measured and looked at in different ways. I'm going to go into that in more detail in a moment, but just to note that people will need different string actions depending on the style of music you play, depending on the way you play, depending on your guitar. It's all quite varied. So quick anecdotal here, I mainly play bass, but I play guitar as well. And on my bass, I used to have two basses that I played live on stage. One of them had a very low action and a very thin neck, and the other one had a much thicker neck and a much higher string action. And I found the way I played them both was quite different. So the low action was really good when I was playing kind of fast things where I was moving around a lot. But I noticed on the higher action, I tended to just play much more aggressively and much more jumping between strings, playing octaves and doing things like slapping and popping. That's just the way I preferred to play it. So I felt a physical difference in the way I played depending on the bass I was using and the action it had. Some people like a high action because they might be using slides a lot and they find that an easier way to play. Again, it's a matter of taste. If you're doing lots of fast, thrashy heavy metal things, you might like a very low action. Action can also cause string buzz. So if your action's very low, it's near the frets and it might buzz a bit. Now that isn't necessarily a problem because some of that buzz that you hear when your guitar's not plugged in doesn't translate to when it's plugged in. It's almost impossible to have a very, very low action without a little bit of buzz, but it can be done if you set up correctly. More about that later in this video. So action is also referred to as string height, and essentially it's the height of the strings measured at the 12th fret. So you measure the height of the string off of the fret. I'll show you how to do that in a moment. But the way you can change your action is both at the bridge and at the nut. Now here I've got some of the tools that I might use to measure my string height, my action. This video is going to be explaining what action is, not going in depth into what the best action for you particularly is. That was really part of your entire setup, and I've made a video about how to set up your guitar, which will help you decide the exact string height or action that you need. But I will talk about different types of string height and why you might prefer it higher or lower. So essentially all these tools here do the same thing. They measure. They're all made of metal. The three on the side here are referred to as action gauges or rulers gauges or guitar string gauges, depending where you buy them from. They're essentially the same thing, but they're made by different companies. The one at the bottom, the Hosco step gauge, is the most expensive one here. It really allows you to go into more detail than the others in the way it measures. It can measure the height at the nut very easily, and we'll look at that in a moment. But all of them do have markings on, which you can just put against your string or against your nut to measure the height. But you don't need something like that. You could easily just use a ruler. Here I've got a ruler. I use this side, it's all in millimeters, and what I like about it is both sides, both edges of the ruler are in millimeters. So no matter what side you butt up against it, you can read it, as opposed to one of those rulers that has millimeters on one side and inches on the other side. But it is one that has inches on the back if we need it. And in this video, I'm going to talk in millimeters, but I always put on the screen the equivalent in inches. It's just being British, I've grown up using millimeters. Here I've got a feeler gauge set, and out of that I've taken two of the different feeler gauges, which I would use for measuring the string height at a certain point, which is the first fret of the guitar when you're looking at the nut. Now we'll get into that in a moment. First I want to mention that here on my setup bench I've got my own personal Stratocaster guitar. So these I make to order. You can get in contact if you want one via my website or leave a comment below. This one's going to feature in quite a few videos in the A to Z series. But anyway, let's get on at looking at how we measure the string height. So here we are looking at the guitar at the angle where this is the 12th fret. Now normally you do this in your playing position, looking down from above, down from the 6th string down, and you can measure each string individually. Here I'm using a string action gauge, and what we can see is at the 12th fret here See the lines underneath each of the numbers? These represent millimetres. 1.5, 1.75, 2.0. I can see that this line lines up with 1.25. So this string is currently 1.25 high. Now, when you're checking your string height, you do it, really, it's easy just to do it at the high E and the low E, the top and bottom strings to start with. And a very basic guide is you want your top string, your top E, to be around 1.5 millimetres and the bottom string to be around 2 millimetres off of the fret. I tend to set mine up with the top string being about 1.25 or 1 millimetre and the bottom string being something like 1.75 millimetres off of the fretboard. So tight in on this angle, we can see that when I turn the Allen key to turn the grubs to raise the saddle, as the saddle raises, the part that the string pivots on or rests on here gets higher as well. So we're raising the string height at this end. Now for most people, when you're changing your action, this is all you need to do. Change the height of your saddles. Let's lower this as far as it will go. See. So with a bit of camera trickery, I'm going to overlay this image of the string touching the saddle at the lowest point it will go to with the string touching the saddle at the highest point it would go to. And you can see there that there is quite a bit of difference in the string height. So there's a lot of adjustment at the bridge end of the guitar. Now there's no set height the saddle should be when you're measuring the string action. Remember, you measure the string action over at the 12th fret. So here are the two feeler gauges I'm going to use to check the string height at the 1st fret, so coming off of the nut. Now, as with everything that I suggest with setups, it's just a guide. Everybody is going to have their own particular taste, so we use what I say as a guideline, and then you might find further down the line you like your strings, your action a bit higher, or you like your action a bit lower. Now I'm just going to slide this 0.508 millimetres, so just over 0.5 millimetre under my 6th string here. And what I can see is, it's quite hard to do leaning over the tripod of the camera, but it slides under without really raising the 6th string, which means it's just at the right height. And then on my top E, I've got a slightly thinner gauge, which is 0.457. I can do the same. Now, many of the videos in my A to Z are actually linked. So what we're going to find is when you're using the bottom 3 strings, because they're wound strings, you can use the same feeler gauge to measure all of them as a guideline. And for the top 3, you could use the same feeler gauge for them as they're unwound strings, just as a guideline. But really, each nut slot is going to be at a slightly different position. Okay, so let me try and show you with a Hosco step gauge how you might use it. It's got 2 little feet on it, which means it can stand over the 1st fret. And then here it's got measurements. The numbers basically refer to millimetres, so 15 is 1.5 millimetres, 14 is 1.4 millimetres. I've loosened my 6th string. I'm going to pull it out of the nut slot. I can put this on here and I can move it along until I can gauge the height. This is almost impossible to do with the camera in front of me. So I can feel it pushing up on the feeler gauge. So I know here it's about 1.5 millimetres. 1.5 millimetres. So that's essentially what action is and how you might measure it. Then it's up to you to decide exactly how you want your action set up for your own playing style and for your own individual guitar. Great, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget, the A that we saw at the beginning is from a well-known guitar related brand. And at the end of the month, the 28th of February, I'll be doing a breakdown of all the different logos that have appeared in the A to Z, all 26 of them. See if you can work out which brand each letter came from. It's always the first letter of the brand. So now we've talked about what action is, you really need to think about what the right action for you is. And I've made a whole video about how to set up your guitar, which really focuses in on how to get the right action for your guitar. So if you want to go and look at that, there's a link here. Until next time, happy strumming.